Hey, my caffeinated queens. You're listening to the Life's a Latte podcast. I'm your host, Mia Linares, and today is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart if you know me personally. I will say that this is probably an episode that if you have kids around, you should probably listen to when you're alone, as we tackle a subject that is very tough, and that is the topic of human trafficking. Kristina Glackin is a human trafficking survivor who brings awareness and hope to those in need by sharing her story of redemption. You will see by her very quirky personality, spoken word poetry, and story from going from victimhood to survivor will make the issue of trafficking very real to you. Since her escape, Kristina is now an advocate, survivor support leader, grant writer, member of the Eastern Iowa Human Trafficking Task Force, and consultant for survivor restoration homes. She has now shifted focus to telling her story for God's glory, pursuing her secondary degree in education, and raising her two beautiful children as a single mother. Through her very authentic message about Jesus' redemption, Kristina wants everyone to know that if he can save her, he can save anyone. You know, there are a very few amount of people that survive what she did. And I am so incredibly glad and honored that she is here today to tell her story. And I cannot wait for you to hear it. And trust me, you will need tissues because I was crying while filming this. So I hope that you have your latte in hand. And let's get into this episode as we chat with Kristina. Thank you so much, Kristina, for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I love hearing your heart about this issue. Obviously, there's a bias for me because of just how close to home it hits and having endured the things that I endured. I can't explain what it feels like to know other people are fighting for women like me. And it is an honor for me as well.
Thank you. I'm so excited to hear your story and for everyone to hear your story. So, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, just about you as a person before we get into your story?
Yeah. Okay. So I am very quirky. I have a tendency to just say things sometimes. I just be saying stuff. That's kind of my catchphrase. Um, I love writing spoken word poetry. I'm a single mom of two kids. I am in college full time right now as well, pursuing my degree in secondary education. Um, I really like food. I don't know. There's all of the important things. So,
Priorities.
food is way up there for me. So.
Well, awesome. Well, I would love for you to just go ahead and share your story.
Okay. And another thing about me is that I tend to make jokes at inappropriate times, especially if I'm talking about something vulnerable, um, like
That's
what we're talking
fine.
about. So be prepared for that. I I never really know where to start when I think about sharing my story because do you start at the beginning? Do you start at the end? I kind of like to start in the middle a little bit
Okay.
because that was the time in my life where I was the most vulnerable to become a victim of trafficking. I think about the now knowing what risk factors are for victims of trafficking. I think about the amount of risk factors that I had, and I'm like, man, I wish somebody would have identified those before a trafficker did.
Mm.
And some of those things are having a parent with an addiction. That was my reality. Having spent time in foster care, again, my reality. Issues with food insecurity or your basic needs not being met. Another thing, even just having low self-esteem or feeling like you're not seen at home. And I think people miss that anyone anyone can be vulnerable to being trafficked if they are in the proximity of a trafficker who knows how to spot a vulnerability, because the reality is we all have some type of vulnerability, but there are
Yeah.
well-known risk factors. So also girls that have a history of having been sexually abused in their childhood are at a higher risk. That was not one of my risk factors. However, I did live in a household where women, and myself included, were sexualized the way that we were talked
Mm-hmm.
about. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that that inadvertently did play into what ended up happening. So, as I said, I spent some time in foster care. And after that, I went to go live with the man who I thought was my biological dad. Found out he wasn't my dad through a DNA test. I dropped out
Wow.
of high school. Um, I went back to live with my mom and my stepdad, and then they ended up selling their home, filing bankruptcy, selling their home, and moving out of state. I stayed in Vegas. So this was in Las Vegas. I didn't say that. I like to start
Okay.
in the middle ish. I work myself back around to the details.
Right.
Um, so they moved out of state and I stayed in Las Vegas alone. And I was
Mm-hmm.
18, legally an adult, which I don't know who made that rule, because have you ever met an 18-year-old?
18's not an adult. Yeah.
It's absolutely not. I had no business living in Vegas alone. That's for sure. Um, yeah, at that point, I had been through so much in my life that I ended up seeking validation, right? So I would go to the mall and I would wait to get the attention of a man and for someone to ask me for my phone number, even if I didn't plan on communicating with him, it made me
Mm-hmm.
feel validated. Um,
Right.
and I didn't recognize that at the time, of course, but looking back, I know exactly what was going on. Um,
Absolutely.
and one of the men that gave me validation ended up holding me against my will. Um, but it wasn't just like throw me in a van. There are these misconceptions that traffickers go around in a white van and snatch people up and throw them in, or that they're, putting drugs on your car door. And, maybe some traffickers
Right.
do that. But
Right.
part of it is they're looking at longevity. They want women that they can break down and convince so that these women think that they're choosing it. So they're not just looking for someone to snatch up, right? I'm not saying men don't do that or there aren't people who predators that do that.
Right.
But a majority of the time, they are playing the long game. They are getting to know,
Romancing you.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, earning your trust. I remember I told him everything that I had been through in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
he kept saying, I can't believe they did that to you. That was so wrong. And he was affirming me that these things were not right and that I
Right.
was worth so much more than that. And he never even tried to sleep with me. He spent 3 weeks doing that. And he'd buy me alcohol. And at the time, like I smoked marijuana a lot, and he
Mm-hmm.
would do that as well. And um, I thought that I had the upper hand on him. And see,
Mm-hmm.
that's part of the art of trafficking
Right.
is
Right.
it's all a facade,
Yeah.
completely, utterly a facade. And he knew something that I wanted was a fake ID with my picture on it, because I kept getting fake IDs and having them taken from me
Mm-hmm.
because it wasn't my picture. And they would ask me questions like, "What's your zodiac sign?" I didn't know who was on the ID. So
Yeah.
he knew I wanted a fake ID. So he told me that there was a concert in LA, which was a 4-hour drive, give or take,
Mm-hmm.
and that he could get me a fake ID with my picture on it.
Okay.
So I agreed to go to this concert and drive to LA in my car with him in the passenger seat, and had no idea what his plan actually was. Um,
Wow.
I still think about that. And one of the things that that in particular has done to me is it's made me very indecisive, because whenever I make a decision, I assign a lot of weight to whatever it can be, what kind of queso I'm buying at the grocery store. And I can
Right.
feel like whatever choice I make has a potential to have catastrophic effects. Um,
Mm,
and this is all in my healing journey of looking back to why am I this way.
of course.
And I think that's one of the reasons.
Wow. And it's so crazy because there is a lot of like misconceptions on one, how trafficking happens when it's just so much more intricate than that. It's very much more planned. And I don't think people realize that. And I feel like a lot of people are um their targets not just by walking down the street, they're targets when, like you said, all of these factors come into play, and they are just vulnerable emotionally, and they get into these relationships with people that, like you said, are trying to build their trust. They seem like gentlemen, they seem like they are your Prince Charming. Isn't there even like a term for that?
Yeah, Romeo.
A Romeo.
Yes, a Romeo.
Yeah.
There's like gorilla, Romeo, and something else, some other terms that people have come up with. And absolutely, I mean, he heard, one, I didn't have family in the city I was living in. Two, that I had mommy issues, I had daddy issues, I had
Yeah.
a history of being mistreated and not having my basic needs met. He heard all of that and saw an opportunity. And that's what they do. And I feel like
Right.
now, so this was 16 years ago. Um, Now we have social media and we have people, kids, that will be putting information on social media that can be seen by anyone if their account's public, and make
Right.
them a target. They can say something like, oh, I hate my parents, or,
Mhm.
I never get to do anything. And
Right.
if the right person or wrong person comes across that, they may begin to groom that person, that child.
Right.
And actually, the average age for someone who's trafficked is between 12 and 14. So when we think about that,
Yeah.
kids are more vulnerable than adults. One of the things that traffickers do, and I'll get back into what it looked like for me, but
Mhm.
is they try and get their victim hooked on drugs. That's one of
Mhm.
the tactics. The reason
Mhm.
for that is when the drugs run out and the girl or the woman is fiending for them, then the
Mhm.
trafficker can say, well, I'll get you that, but you have to do this for me first because we don't have the money. But we
Right.
can get the drugs if you do X, Y, and Z. Um, that's one thing they do. For
Mm.
me, when going to leave out a lot of details for the sake of time, but
Sure.
um, I absolutely did not want to or agree to sell myself. And
Mhm.
for 4 days, this man kept me awake in a hotel, starved me, didn't beat me until the last day, the last of those 4 days, and
Wow.
tried to convince me and kept saying that it's only $400, $400. And he kept saying just one night, $400. And he was also drugging me. I later found out it was ecstasy. And apparently, when you are
Wow.
up on ecstasy, you're way up. But if you are not, which of course I wasn't, it puts you in a very bad place. I was hallucinating, probably a combination of all of the things that were going on. Um,
Mm.
and I ended up agreeing and saying, okay, if it's only one night, I was like, then I get to leave, right? And he
Was this
told me,
initially, like, the first day?
no, this was after 4 days of me
After
saying
4 days?
no.
Oh, wow,
And
okay.
and you have to remember at this point, so he had taken my ID because he told me he was going to scan it to get a fake ID made. He had taken my phone.
Oh,
He had held me at gunpoint. He had my
wow.
car and my car keys. And this was a time where, I mean, I had to use MapQuest to go drive across state lines. It wasn't where you just had GPS available.
GPS, right.
So even if I mean, I had a flip phone, right? Like this was
Mhm.
just there. We didn't have um, access to things like we do now, and resources, right? So
Right.
he had this girl come in, and she apparently was at one point in a position like I was in, and but she became his bottom, and
What is
she
a
took
bottom?
pictures
Do
of,
you mind just saying what that
yeah,
is?
yeah. So a bottom is the woman who has done not only done everything that the trafficker has asked of them, but also recruited other women. That way she can rest, and she doesn't have
Mm,
to um,
to do it herself.
bring in money. Yeah.
So
And
it's
so
an
she,
incentive to be that and to
yes.
stay in it ultimately.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, you're okay. Um, she took pictures of me and put them on Craigslist. And yeah, when men would call, she would answer the phone and pretend to be me. And
Wow.
then they would send men to the hotel room. Um, but yeah, he, like I said, he said it was one night, but it was not, that was not ever part of his plan. He was just saying that. Um, so a few more days went by, and I still, though, was not submitting. I was causing a
Mm,
lot of issues for them. Um, and I don't think he anticipated that. I think
mm,
they anticipated me to just give in, and accept what was going on. And when I didn't, they left me alone with this other woman. And she ended up telling me they were planning to kill me and that I needed to escape. At
wow.
that point, yeah, I, if I'm being completely honest, I didn't really care that they were planning to kill me because that would have meant it was over.
Right.
Um, and I had I had no real will to live anymore. So
Wow.
the one thing that I wasn't okay with was the fact that my mother had no idea where I was.
Wow.
And um oops. And regardless of all of the things that had taken place in my life, um I wasn't okay with that. And I wanted to
Yeah.
be able to hear her voice and for her to
Right.
know what was going on. Ultimately, where to find my body is what I just kept thinking. Um, and so I started to tell the men that came to the room what was going on. Most of them did not care.
Right.
And they were, if anything, they were afraid that it was like a sting operation or something. They got really paranoid. And I get it. Um, but then there was this man named Adam that came in. And when I told him instantly, and all I was asking was to use their phone. That was the only thing I
Mhm.
was asking. Um, I asked him to use his phone so I could call my mom. And once he was like, wait, you don't want to be doing this, um, he decided he was going to help me escape.
Wow. So
So,
did most of these guys think that you were doing this on your own accord, or they just didn't care, but he just happened to?
no, they thought that I was doing it on my own. They thought that I was okay with it, which doesn't make sense if
Right.
my demeanor had to be saying something different.
Right.
Um, I,
I think guys know but they like
Eh,
don't want to accept the fact that they're participating in that. They would rather think
right.
it's something that's consensual.
Absolutely. Um,
Wow.
ugh. But Adam showed up. So because of that, I'm still here. And so many
Wow.
times I think about if God could use him to save me, who are we to count ourselves out, right?
Wow.
After all this happened, so long story short, he we went to the police. I lied and said that I ran to a gas station, that Adam found me there. That way Adam didn't get in trouble.
Hmm.
The police went back to the hotel room. Um, there was, I mean, evidence everywhere. My car was still there. They had my car keys, but my car was still there. The police could have dusted for fingerprints. They could have done anything, and they did nothing. They
Wow.
did
Really?
nothing. And at that point in time, so again, 16 years ago, um, actually 17 now, it was 17 years ago now. Um, Trafficking wasn't really like I had never heard that word. That
Hmm.
wasn't something that was talked about. I mean, I didn't know what it meant.
Right.
Um, and so when I described what happened, I said I was set up and held against my will and forced to sell myself because I didn't have a word for it.
Right.
And the police didn't charge me with prostitution, but they also didn't. The only thing I remember this officer saying to me is, "Your mom let you live in Vegas alone at 18." Like, that's
He
all I
said
remember her
that.
saying.
Or
Yes,
she's, was it a, you
she.
said it
It was a she.
she? Wow.
Yeah, and that's the
Wow.
only thing I remember her saying. Instead of saying, "Oh my gosh, someone did this to you," it was,
Right.
blame shifting to my mother. Um, and
Sorry, that boils my blood.
listen, the times that I have ruminated on that, and I'm just like, what? And so now I've been able to actually have conversations with law enforcement
Mm,
to help enlighten them and help with training in the anti-trafficking world. I
right.
spent time on our Eastern Iowa task force as well against trafficking, working with the head of different police departments. So, you know, it's come full circle.
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I've been able to make it known that that is not okay.
Right.
Maybe not the officer who did it, but
So
it's
was your
still
trafficker ever caught?
no,
Mm, I'm
no.
really sorry to hear that. And like, I guess as a survivor, like, and it's okay if this is like too vulnerable to talk about, but like, how does that make you feel feeling like you didn't get justice? I know as a believer, you know that's in the Lord's hands, but like, how does that feel just practically as a human, you know?
Yeah, it's funny because I actually thought about this the other day, um, in depth.
Yeah.
I came across some TikTok of a man that spent time in prison and he answers people's questions. Someone asked what happens to traffickers in prison,
Hmm.
and he had this whole video about how they're treated or what it looks like. And he did say that a lot of times, like if they're they seem like cool because of the language that they use or the things they say they were able to do, and the manipulation tactics. But he said usually um, it's not unless it was like the family member of another inmate that it happened to, then there's some type of retaliation, but otherwise, not even in prison. Um, and so I was thinking so much about that. And I was like, not that I would want, some type of retaliation in prison, but I was thinking about that. If even prisoners aren't seeing that, our justice system isn't seeing it.
Right.
Um, I was feeling kind of kind of defeated. Like, is there, as a survivor, as a human, um, is there any justice for me?
Right.
And I always have to go back to vengeance is mine, says the
Yeah.
Lord. I have to go back to that because that's all there is.
Yeah.
There is no, I cannot enforce justice, but what I can do is no longer allow what happened to me to hinder me.
Right.
And the more and more I give it to God, the more God does something with it, something
Yeah.
beautiful, something powerful, something beyond me. It's the entire concept of beauty for ashes. And
Absolutely.
when I think about how God has been able to use what happened to me to help bring awareness, set other people free, and hopefully help potential victims avoid being trafficked, I can't really be upset. I also heard statistics that only about 2% of
Mhm.
victims survive.
Wow.
And I think about
Yeah.
how close it was for me,
Yeah.
and that I am still alive. And I
Yeah.
don't know how, other than God. I don't know why, other than God. But what I do know is that I'm not going to waste it,
Yeah.
because there were um, a lot of women who are not alive anymore.
Right.
And I get to speak out on their behalf. I get to um, use my voice to not only raise awareness and to share my story, but to talk about the God that loves and saves even the people that the rest of the world is overlooking, or
Right.
looking down on. And that's an honor and a
Right.
privilege. When I think about the life that the man who trafficked me is living, I have pity for him.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier. Um,
Wow,
I
you're
haven't
so
always,
strong, dude. You're so
no,
strong.
I am not. God is. And I have to keep going back to him. And that's one thing I feel like is a huge blessing, is that I am constantly in a position where I'm relying on God. And um, I feel like that is a huge blessing, because I rather face 1,000 trials with God than one without him. The peace that
Wow.
I have, and the knowledge that I can, um, no matter what is happening, if I call on him, he's going to answer me. I can look back at the places that I was, the time that I was in that hotel room. If I can look back on that and know that God saw me then there's no trial I'll face today or tomorrow or next week that God is not going to see me and see me through it. If I
Oh,
can defeat those odds because God said so, then there's
right.
nothing I can't do. And I feel like it's a beautiful gift that came at a very high price. But that's exactly what the gospel is, a beautiful gift that came at the highest price. And so I have to always go back to that. But one thing I want to talk about too, two things. One is what it looked like after I left that hotel room,
Yeah.
because I lost my job. I became homeless because the person who owned the house, my roommate's uncle owned the house, and he didn't feel like it was safe for me to be there. Rightfully so. At the
So he was
time I
looking
didn't.
out for himself.
And his niece, yeah. And so I became homeless. Um and I just kept pushing. I just kept pushing. I went and I got a different job, and I was like, this is just what it is. And I just kept going like nothing happened. And that was a terrible decision. And that was my pride. Um, and just this belief that, I was raised up to believe that things that happen to me just happen to people. And you don't get to just slow down take care of you, that I wasn't that important.
Wow.
And so I just kept pushing. And then I started having panic attacks all of the time. Um, I mean, every day. And I still, for whatever reason, in my mind, it wasn't logical that I was having panic attacks. I was like, I'm not even stressed about anything. Like,
Yeah.
because when I thought about the life that I had endured, I was like, this just happens to people. This happens to everybody.
Right.
And so I didn't know why I was having these panic attacks. Um, I became malnourished because my body was under so much stress that I was not absorbing nutrients from food.
Wow.
I ended up becoming a mom shortly thereafter. I was pregnant with my son less than a year after I was trafficked. I did not have
Wow.
time to heal. Um, and it was hard. It was very hard, and the panic attacks didn't stop, and I just kept turning to temporary things. I kept turning to drinking. I kept turning to marijuana. I kept turning to men, or to going out and dancing, or to putting all this effort into having my hair done and my nails done, and always, trying to feel beautiful. But um, I was crumbling on the inside. Um, and nothing worked. And a few years after that, my son was 4 years old, and he was asleep in the other room. And I had this panic attack that lasted 4 hours.
Wow.
And I finally cried out to God. The time before that I sincerely cried out to God was when I was being trafficked. I remember, but I didn't cry out to God during that time in a way that was like, God, please save me. It was like, God, why do you hate me? You know, because
Yeah.
why did life look like it did? I was 18, and in those short 18 years, I had been medically neglected, not had food, not had lunch at school, had living with a parent with an addiction, lost custody, uh, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, all of those things. Found out my dad wasn't my dad, and then sold by a stranger. And
Wow.
at that point in that hotel room, I was convinced that God just hated me. And then flash forward to the second sincere cry, um, the night that I was having that 4 hour long panic attack. I asked God to take my life that night because I just could not do it anymore. And I I wasn't going to kill myself because my son was
Yeah.
asleep in the other room. There's no way I could do that. But I thought that if I went naturally, if God intervened, then it would be okay. My son would be okay. Um, but the crazy thing about God is sometimes we say one thing and he hears another. And when I asked him to take my life, he heard take my life, right? Take it from me and put it
In a
in his
different
hands.
sense.
Yes. And when I woke up the next morning, and I did wake up, like, praise God, right, that I didn't die that night. Um, I had this peace and this joy, and I was like, I had never felt. And I was like, wait, God, you heard me. Like, you had to hear me. Um, and then I was like, I don't even know how to pray. That's what I kept thinking. Like, I don't even know how to pray. Like, how am I supposed to talk to you? I didn't realize it was literally just talking to God. And so that's what I did. I just kept talking to God. I just kept seeking him. And then I would, like, YouTube different sermons, and then Google like numbers I would see repeating the word Bible next to it to find Bible verses, because I didn't know. I had never read the Bible. I had never
So having a relationship with God was not something that that you grew up with in any sort of
no,
way.
not at all.
Wow.
No, the only things I had been told about God was that when you lie, he gives you canker sores. And
I've
that
never heard that. I'm sorry.
yeah,
I've never,
it's
I've never
not
heard
true.
that.
I looked, it's not in the Bible. False. And that what was the other thing? Oh, if you could do anything you wanted, if you ask God to forgive you, he'll forgive you and it's fine. Um, and I feel like a lot of people have that belief. uh, but yeah, that's what I had known of God prior to that point. Um,
Mhm.
and yes, that was the last panic attack I had, and it's been 10 years. 10 years without a panic attack.
Wow.
And I have just clung to God ever since. And he has, I was a high school dropout. And I don't think I mentioned that. I was a high school dropout. And now I have my associate's degree and pursuing my bachelor's degree.
Mm-hmm.
I am uh, sober. I am waiting for marriage. I am a single mom of two kids, 9 and 14.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother testimony of my daughter. In the very beginning of my walk with the Lord, that was just a whole thing. But God, she is incredible. Both of my kids are. And yeah, I most days I don't have any idea what I'm doing, but I trust that God does. So I'll show up if he goes first, um,
Yeah.
and
Wow.
so that's been it. And now I've been able to raise awareness. I've been able to help different programs or different organizations with their programming to know, resources that survivors will need. So like I said, I was homeless. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have my job anymore. I lost my job, and I didn't have resources for healing, for counseling, for therapy, for anything. And so that's one of the things I've been um, very passionate about, is helping organizations understand the need for certain resources and what a survivor may
Mm-hmm.
need in regard to life skills and different things like that.
Yeah.
Housing, a space to heal.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
awesome. And how, like, I guess I would love to see how we can help. Like, is there anything we can do? Is there any way that we can support you on your journey,
yeah.
on your ministry, just you going forward? And how can we keep in touch with you, because you are an amazing person, and I your story has just touched me beyond belief, actually leaving me speechless. Like I could barely talk during your whole thing anyway. But I would love to know, like, how we can support you, and also, like, I guess if you have one word of advice, not one word specifically, but like
Yeah.
a word of advice. If someone just happens to be in a vulnerable position, right? Or even happens to be in the position that you were in, if the Lord brought them upon this podcast, what would you like to say to them?
I think I'll start with what I would say to them and then come back
Yeah.
to the other things. Um, ah, your life is not over. And every single dream that you had when you were a little girl has not died. The God that created you still sees you, even when you feel like you're invisible to everyone around you. Even when you feel like nobody understands your pain, God knows that pain. And he wants to take that from you. You don't have to carry it. He tells us to cast our cares on him because he cares for us and that his burden is light. He wants you to trade everything you've been carrying for this peace that makes no sense, this peace that doesn't leave you even in the hardest times. And he loves you. You are worth so much more than what your body can offer someone. You were created with a purpose, and that purpose isn't over even if you feel like giving up right now. If you're in a position where you do feel like giving up, I want to tell you that that's exactly where God wants to meet you, because you can give up and give everything to him and he can just carry you. He can carry you. That is what I would say. So,
And that's a message for a lot of people. A lot of people. Thank you so much.
yes. And to find me, yeah, right now, like I said, I am a full-time single mom of 2 kids. I am a full-time college student. As God opens doors, I share my story and my testimony. And I would love to be able to do that more and to have the ability um, to have more freedom to do that. Financially and otherwise. It doesn't mean, I'm not saying to give me money by any means, but praying for
But
that.
give her money.
No, that's not.
But definitely give her money. I say so.
Don't do that. I will cry. I would never stop crying. And yeah, so that pray for me. Yeah, I don't know. So find me. I mean, I'm the only Kristina Glackin, spelled Kristina Glackin, like the only one in America, I'm pretty sure. So if you just Google me. But yeah, I have a website, KristinaGlackin.com. I am on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Connect with me. I would love to answer questions you might have, or anything like that. Yeah, so what I really want to be able to do is to finally write a book.
Oh, please do. I was
And
hoping that you would say that.
so if anybody knows any publishers that would like to collaborate on that, that would be incredible. But it's been on my heart to write a book for 6 years, and I love to write, but I don't know where to start or what to do. And so, yeah, praying for that. Or if anybody hears this and is like, hey, I own a publishing company, then again, only Kristina Glackin in America. So Google me. No, so yeah,
Yes.
there's that. Honestly, like I said, most days I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just trusting that God does, and going where he leads me. So far so good. My life looks nothing like it did before, in just 10 short years. So who knows what God's gonna do next. But yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And definitely follow her TikTok. That's where I found her, and her TikToks are incredible. She shares her story, and yeah, I'm really honored that you came to speak on my podcast, Kristina. It's been an honor and a blessing, and thank you for sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful. I thought I wasn't going to cry. I tried to hold out the entire time, but here we are.
You had me crying, so it's fine. I was trying to hold back my tears the entire episode almost.
I thought if I smiled enough, I wouldn't cry, but it got to me. So
It's okay. It's a powerful story. Thank you so much, Kristina. And I will make sure that your social handles and everything are included so that people can continue to follow you.
okay, sounds good. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay.
Bye.
Hey beauties, I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I hope that it made you laugh, cry, or touch your heart. This podcast is available on all streaming platforms. You can also watch the video version of this podcast on YouTube. If you have a story that you would like to share, feel free to email me at podcast@lifesalate.com. Also, be sure to follow us on social media at Life's a Latte Podcast across all platforms. This way you know when a new episode drops. Do me a big favor and follow and subscribe. And while you're at it, make sure to share this podcast with a friend. I'm sure that there are other people that need or want to hear it. Ciao for now.